Yo, what's going on? It's your boy Tisa coming with a very long overdue trade deadline video, but still, nonetheless, we're going to be tackling who I think are the winners, losers, and the intriguing trades that happened throughout this deadline. So if you're new, please hit a like or maybe even subscribe to the channel, as I will be posting more NBA content as the line goes down and as the playoff season approaches. So the first team we'll be taking a look at is the Boston Celtics, who acquired guard Evan Fournier in exchange for Jeff Teague and 2 second-round picks, and also traded up Daniel Theis and Javonte Green to the Chicago Bulls in exchange for Mo Wagner and Luke Cornett. Overall, I think this is a really solid or decent trade for Boston. If you look at Evan Fournier, he is a decent, not even a decent, but a great shooter, marking up at 20 points per game on great efficiency, 40% from the arc, and with his acquisition towards this team, we may see a huge offensive lift off of Jaylen Brown and Tatum's shoulder, which may help them become more consistent in terms of scoring, as they added another option that they can rely on, hopefully come playoff time as well. With them gaining Wagner and shipping off Theis, and also letting go of Teague and Green, I think this is also a pretty good move for them, as they not only gain a solid young piece who still has potential that could come off the bench, but in the long term it could also help them in their salary cap, which of course a very good contending team would want. But I still think that this trade will be graded by me as a B, because it doesn't really do anything for them currently, as I do not still see them as ferocious contenders that could still threaten the top of the Eastern Conference. Next up, we have the Houston Rockets, and jeez, good lord, that was pretty terrible of them. How could you go from James Harden to wanting to offer him for some solid young players like Tyler Hero and Duncan Robinson and picks? Well, they got picks part, however, they got back Caris LeVert in return, who I'd say was a very good pickup, but they still traded him for Victor Oladipo. And we see now that Victor Oladipo's trade value isn't even near the echelon of Caris LeVert and what he could have done for him. What makes this trade so bad for them was not only that they had high expectations in the returns that Oladipo might reap for them, but they literally got back Avery Bradley, Kelly Olynyk, who I'd say aren't that valuable of assets as well for them. Whether they would want to keep them in their team for the long run or they could just trade them away, that won't really be doing much for him. And they did for sure get a single draft pick, which I'd say isn't still something that's noteworthy. And what's even more terrible is they got 2 very futile and just obsolete pick swaps that cannot even be used for them, because you look at the Heat, and I think it's the Bucks that the other pick swap was from. They're not gonna be in the bottom or in the top of the lottery anytime soon. The movement from Houston is obviously an F, but I don't think that's something that they should be mourning about, because they're still trying to tank, and this might, at the end of the day, be able to help them. The next trade that will be assessed is the Atlanta Hawks to Clippers deal that saw Lou Will, the 2023 second round pick of the Clippers, and the 2027 second round pick of the Clippers as well, and some cash considerations sent towards the Hawks, while the Clippers will receive Rajon Rondo. I really think the Hawks did really well with this deal. Not only do they get 2 bonus picks, some cash considerations, but they get Lou Williams, who I'd say still could be somewhat valuable, especially coming off the bench, because the Rajon Rondo experiment in Atlanta hasn't been good whatsoever. With not only injuries, but as he got back in the floor, he's been barely impressing the Hawks at all. Lou Williams will be able to provide savvy, tactical playoff experience come postseason time if the Hawks make it, which I think they will, and will be able to pass down more offensive abilities and playmaking skill sets that would help Trae Young in the long run. Speaking of the defensive end, I don't think losing Rajon Rondo would be a major problem, as they will be getting a guy like Chris Dunn back who could fill in that gap. I feel this trade will be able to do more good than harm for the Clippers, because they were able to steer away from that playmaking issue that they have that everyone wants them to address. However, I don't think trading for a guy like Rajon Rondo would be a good move. Yes, he still has that playmaking ability and can be very vital come playoff time, but I feel like the offense would stall a lot when he's on the floor, as he really doesn't have that good of an ability as compared to other trade interests that they had at once, such as George Hill or Lonzo Ball, which I think would still be better fits than Rajon Rondo. But still, however, I still think that this is a pretty competent trade for the Clippers. And there was also a three-team deal that featured the Knicks, the Thunder, and the Sixers. But right now, we're going to be focusing on the Thunder and the Sixers because, the Knicks only pretty much got Terrence Ferguson. So for the Thunder, they traded away George Hill to the Sixers and received Tony Bradley, Austin Rivers, who they so happened to waive, and 2 second-round picks, alongside OKC's boatload of 34 whole picks for the next 7 years. They're also going to be getting back another player for the young gun DNA, Tony Bradley. Tony Bradley seems to be a very intriguing case because right after he got traded, Joel Embiid seemed to be very high on him, as he said and told the Thunder to build around him. And seeing that the Thunder is starting a new revolution of new era players, they definitely will. Tony Bradley is just 23. He seems to have a lot of upside, and I guess this is another win for Presti, who keeps not only clamoring draft picks but also snagging and reeling in players who already seem to have a lot of potential and just such a young age. They're already very competitive among veteran-like teams, and they're not losing so much as the league originally thought that they would. The transaction was also a huge dub for the Sixers, as, thinking of it, George Hill isn't gonna bring the Kyle Lowry experience that the Sixers fans hope to see in the second half of the season, but he somewhat represents and emulates that sort of play style with such terrific ball handling, playmaking, and even shooting, and he comes at a very discounted price. We all know Hill's a veteran, and come playoff time he's going to be very important, especially for the Sixers, who not necessarily are inexperienced, but it will be way better for a team such as that to keep building on that. So I'll give the Sixers an A. The next trade is somewhat eye-opening, as we're going to be looking at the Trailblazers and the Raptors. The Blazers receiving Norman Powell, and the Raptors getting back Rodney Hood and Gary Trent Jr. I don't understand why the Blazers needed to trade for Norman Powell, especially with Gary Trent Jr. popping off. And I know he's been somewhat of a streaky player who could go from scoring about 20 a night to barely even touching the ball and making it find the bottom of the net. But still, nonetheless, he's a young player, and I believe that in a good amount of time, he could even be a better player than Norman Powell. And still, this trade somewhat still makes relevant sense to the Blazers, as when you trade for a guy like Norman Powell, who's had a very stellar season, it's gonna pitch in your stars in the long run. Tell guys like Lillard and McCollum, tell them for the front office to basically remind them that they're gonna do whatever it takes for them not only to stay, but to build a better team around them. So for the Blazers, I'm gonna be giving them a C for effort. I think the Raptors also have another head scratcher in their case, at least on my humble opinion, as they were targeting to trade both Kyle Lowry and Norman Powell. We all know that the Kyle Lowry trade didn't go down, and I still believe that Trent is a very solid pickup for them because they're gonna get younger. But with Kyle Lowry in the team, it doesn't really make their intentions clear on what to do, not only for this season, playing out the rest of it, but also moving forward. Would they still try to give Kyle Lowry a huge hefty contract by the end of the year to try to extend him, compromising the possibility of letting the younger players go, or are they just gonna let him walk or trade him by the end of the season if his contract is still valuable and if teams are still attracted to him? Nonetheless, it's still a great deal that involves a really good young player that I think the Raptors will be taking pride of in the upcoming future. So I'll give this about a B. Next up, we'll be tackling the Heat, which I don't think really needs to be furtherly explained, as I believe that they plundered through the Rockets' interest in getting more players than what they got. They only traded away a couple of decent role players and alongside some useless pick swaps, and this is a really good trade. Oladipo, as much of an injury-prone player he is, getting him for that value is a massive win. He may be on an expiring contract, but I do not really think that he walks after this season, because I think players like Oladipo, they are really keen on playing for a championship contender team, and now that he is on one, I don't think he's gonna pass up that opportunity as his career unfolds. So I'm gonna give this trade for the Heat an A minus. The biggest winner in my eyes in this trade deadline would be the Bulls. They receive Alfred Amino and Vucevic by trading away Wendell Carter, Otto Porter Jr., and 2 first-round picks to the Orlando Magic. What else could we say about the Chicago Bulls? I mean, they positioned themselves greatly to be in the playoff picture, and with the acquisition of Vucevic, they now have someone to pair with Zach LaVine. It would have been way nicer if they were able to get Lonzo, but not too shabby to add someone that's an all-star who averages nearly 25, 12, and 3.8 assists. Not a lot of people recognize how young this team is, and I believe that this trade will not only benefit them in the playoffs this year, but also for their future, as they have a solid young core built around Zach LaVine, Patrick Williams, and Vooch, who's still on the peak of his prime. They could have traded Lauri Markkanen, but they might get some other deals with him because we all know that back a front court that consists of Vooch and Lauri might not work out because they somewhat negate each other's advantages, and it just doesn't make sense to put them together. Overall, this Bulls team gets an A plus in my opinion. We all know who the biggest seller was in the trade deadline this year, and it was the stuck in the mediocre purgatory Orlando Magic, who had a decent start, not even decent, a great start this season, until guys went down with injuries that ended their season. But for a team that has been stuck around the 7th or 8th seed for about a couple of years now, I bet it was time to let go of some of their key players for a rebuild. The 2 first-round picks are obviously ideal, and taking in the situation that the Magic is in right now, trading away Vucevic would be great for the draft this year. But taking back players such as Otto Porter and Wendell Carter Jr., I feel like they could have done more for trading away their franchise player, and that hopefully Wendell Carter will pick up some steam, and Orlando might not be known for their development of young players, but hopefully they're gonna get it right this time. We're not really gonna go that deep into the Fournier trade. I believe that it is a very bad move for them, especially just trading away such a solid piece in Fournier and not really getting that much value in return. He is definitely worth more than 2 second-round picks, especially with how the game is played these days and how he's had a pretty solid season. The Gordon trade, even though what they got back seemed mediocre, I feel like it was the best deal they got in return, and that isn't really saying much. I mean, they got Gary Harris and RJ Hampton. Gary Harris is a very injury-prone dude who a lot of people thought would be actually the franchise player of the Nuggets way back then, and that didn't really pan out. RJ Hampton, I think he's still very raw, and as I said earlier, if the Magic gets to develop him and a snap of the finger, enabling the franchise and the front office to become more competent in the growth aspect, and that will be a great thing for them. However, this is just a B for them. The Nuggets, however, I think are big winners in this trade, as they load off 2 good players, but they don't really use them as much as they should be. And they got back Aaron Gordon, who fills in the gap of Jeremy Grant, and I feel like he's going to be more suitable for the team, especially with Jokic manning the point. And all those lobs will be crazy as they were thrown, and he's also a pretty good post player. This definitely makes the Nuggets a more formidable contender, and with that, I will give the Nuggets a grade of an A. I know there were more transactions that went down, including players that were waived, players that were bought out and signed, but we only touched upon the major trades and major movements that shake the league. And that has been my personal assessment for each trade that went down, giving teams out different grades and how they did. And if you made it this far in the video, I really appreciate it. Please leave a like if you enjoyed, comment if you're new, or even subscribe. Stay tuned for some more NBA content, especially with the mid-season turning out, more heat picking up as we approach the playoffs. And yeah,